What was the thing about the juice?
Biggs, you should have been here. Hello, welcome to Galactic Initiative. I'm your host, Jeff. In this show, Sean and I will discuss the original Star Wars radio drama. We'll probably need more than one episode to cover it, so the upcoming conversation is likely part one. Welcome, Sean.
Hello, my friend.
When I first suggested the radio drama as our next project, were you surprised? And after listening to it, how do you feel?
I would say that I was surprised. Normally, when we talk Star Wars, we talk about the visual media. We talk about the films, the TV shows, the cartoons, comic books. And you are more of a consumer of the printed media of Star Wars than I am, at least more recently. And so digging into the past and some of the strange ephemera of Star Wars and coming up with the radio drama, I was a little bit surprised, but I was also intrigued because while I've known about its existence, I have never actually sat down and listened to it. So it was a challenge to me and an exciting one because it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go back and try something new. After having listened to it, I'm speechless. Actually, it is a very strange and sort of uneasy experience, while at the same time it's interesting and it's full Star Wars. It's episode 4 is kind of as we know it, with some of the things that we've heard about with the extra scenes and whatnot. But it was a surreal experience for me. I mean, especially since we have some of the original cast involved with the voices, so there's some familiarity there. There's also some really weird cognitive dissonance that happens with some of the other voice actors, like particularly the gentleman who voiced Darth Vader. That just seems strange to me when you're expecting James Earl Jones. So I am aghast. I am impressed. I am sad and happy all at the same time. It's a very confusing experience. It's Star Wars. It's new and interesting Star Wars to me. Some of the additional scenes, which we'll talk about later, that are in the radio drama that come from some of George Lucas's notes, but kind of kills the Star Wars that we knew, that we were familiar with, simply because of the retelling or the replaying of the scenes from episode 4 in different ways with different character voices. The performances sort of change your experience of Star Wars, and so that was kind of took me back a little bit. But all in all, I'm happy for having done it, and I look forward to talking about it with you.
Surreal is a great word. It just changed my perspective of early Star Wars. I wonder, and we'll break this down as we go, but I wonder if this radio drama is truer to Lucas's original vision for A New Hope. Do you think this is Lucas's notes and the original concept? Do you think this is out of left field and you have a writer taking Lucas's ideas in completely different directions? I mean, how much does the radio drama reflect Lucas and original Star Wars?
It's difficult to tell simply because, I mean, the production notes on this broadcast, it says that, the author or the script writer for this particular performance had access to George Lucas's original drafts of the script and was allowed to use those things as inspiration. But he's also a novelist, and he's written several Star Wars novels, so I'm sure he also added his own embellishments to some of these scenes. But we know for a fact, like for the characters of Cammy and Fixer and the whole Biggs coming back to Tatooine to talk to Luke about joining the rebellion, all those things are actually cut scenes from Star Wars. We've seen the filmed and pre-production or almost finished form. And so we know a lot of that comes straight from Lucas, at very least the characters of Cammy and Fixer and maybe Wendy and a few other people. But I don't know like how much of Lucas's original notes were used for some of the scenes, for example, like Princess Leia and her interactions with Lord Tyon, things of that nature. Now, we have seen over the years, for example, the Dark Horse Comics version of the first draft of George Lucas's script, which if you read through that graphic novel or through the individual comic issues, it's very bizarre. And it's not the Star Wars films starting in 77. So I view episode 4 as well through a certain lens. The lines, the order that they appear in or are spoken, the music, the sound effects, all those things in that film. And the rearranging of that stuff in this particular broadcast and some of the performances of the voice actors completely changes that. I guess on one hand, Lucas blessed this. He clearly said this was a good thing and he wanted it to happen. We'll probably talk about the waiving of his royalty fees and whatnot for using it. Only charged him $1 or whatever to be able to make this performance. And the fact that he lent all this stuff to the writer, I just don't know. I can't say 100% of the stuff that's in there is Lucas. I would say it's closer to what he wanted because we do know about those scenes that were ultimately cut from the final edit of the film version of Star Wars. And we do know these are characters that he created. But I don't know if 100% of those extra scenes and extra dialogue that appear in this radio drama are 100% George, but probably say it's about 80% George. There's been a lot of conversation over the years about George needing an editor and the fact that Star Wars was a critical success in part due to other people taking the film away from him at the last minute and editing it to a more watchable format. I think that maybe using unedited George, as we've seen in the prequels and in other places, is probably not a good idea, but it happened here and it created this thing that we're now going to delve into and tear apart and freak out about.
The runtime of A New Hope prevented Lucas from including everything that he wanted. And depending on what you believe, who you believe, and when, Star Wars as a standalone film, Star Wars as part of a trilogy, Star Wars as part of 6 or more films, but given 5 hours of airtime, this radio drama includes so much more than the original film. And because of the format on radio, some of it is exposition, but they're not just explaining things that people in the theaters could see. It just takes us in so many weird and interesting directions. Before we get into characters and story, let's talk a little bit about how this thing came to be. So the radio drama was broadcast on National Public Radio in 1981 over a period of 13 weeks. It stemmed from NPR Playhouse, which was a theater program, started in the late 70s and ran through the early 2000s. In 1972, NPR launched a weekly live drama show called Earplay that drew a lot of critical acclaim, but only a modest number of subscribers. And there were a number of producers involved with that show, executives within NPR who, growing up, had experienced the golden age of radio, and they wanted to revive the medium. They thought live theater, radio dramas might be the way to go. So based on the mild success of Earplay, they launched Playhouse, which is going to be a larger scale, pre-recorded program. The biggest Playhouse production by far is this Star Wars radio drama. The station that is going to put this together and air it is KUSC-FM in downtown LA. And that station's owned by the University of Southern California, USC. George Lucas is a graduate of USC Film School. You already mentioned him waiving his royalty fees for the production. What could Lucas have charged for a radio dramatization of Star Wars in 1981? This is on the heels of not only A New Hope in 1977, but The Amazing Empire Strikes Back in 1980, thinking about what he could have charged for the rights to do this, and he charges $1 to this public radio station in LA owned by his alma mater, USC. Richard Toscan, dean at USC, who's a producer and editor and writer. Frank Mankiewicz, who is a USC grad, has just become the president of NPR. Actor, producer John Houseman, who at the time was Smith Barney's They Earn It pitch guy. These three come together. They collaborate. They use their contacts. Going all the way back, Houseman founded the Mercury Theater in New York City, and he produced the original War of the Worlds broadcast with Orson Welles. Frank Mankiewicz's father co-wrote Citizen Kane with Orson Welles. One of Tuscan's students suggests doing Star Wars with Playhouse, bring in a younger audience. Well, that'll just bring a much larger audience of all ages. So these three, Tuscan, Mankiewicz, and Houseman, use their network of academic and entertainment connections, and they bring this thing to fruition. Just incredible.
You're talking about some serious royalty when it comes to radio and radio theater. War of the Worlds broadcast is the most famous and infamous radio drama ever performed. Citizen Kane, considered by some the greatest film of all time. These guys being involved with Orson Welles, and I mean, he is a giant in the industry of Hollywood, and I mean, they brought some serious credibility to the project, the radio theater. I would say, outside of maybe a few of these NPR type outlets, had really by the 80s had really kind of almost been dead when you think about it. We have moved on to television has now ascended to be a very influential media platform. I mean, when you compare it to from the 50s to the 80s, and then cinema, of course, has always been king. But people getting their entertainment through the radio is happening less and less, and radio became more of an information tool for news and sports, and then pop music. Right? It wasn't for entertainment of the mind anymore, the way it used to be. So why not latch on to the most popular phenomena in the world at that time, which you said, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back had just come out. You're talking about the apex, really, at this point of the Star Wars Lucas brand. And so why not try and attach this radio entertainment storytelling hour to that brand, and like you say, not only bring in a wide audience, but introduce a younger audience who might not have even been exposed to that. Not a lot of kids in the 80s had ever listened to Kellogg's Phantom Hour or the Lone Ranger broadcast, or those things that were on the radio at the time, which was before the families gathered around the television, before there was even television. Families gathered around and listened to stories of the Phantom and the Shadow and Batman and all these things, Lone Ranger, Buck Rogers, all these things on the radio. This was where you went for your entertainment, and you see this dying genre, or this genre in decline, trying to revitalize itself. I mean, doing Star Wars makes perfect sense. And of course, you have this network of people who know each other through university association with the USC. Lucas, of course, it's been written about widely of his whole love of serial films, the old Buck Rogers series, and this old time entertainment is something that he taps into a lot in his creative endeavors with Indiana Jones and with Star Wars and all these things. It makes perfect sense for him to be involved in this as well. And I think, at this point, Lucas was doing quite fine, and I don't think that he would extort NPR by taking a huge fee. Now, if somebody else had come along, perhaps, if some other corporation had come along and said, we want to record something and market it and sell it, he probably would have charged the rights. But because this is NPR and because it's the University of Southern California, I thought it was a cool thing for him to do that, to just say, hey, you guys, so it's legal. I got to take $1, but spend the money elsewhere. And which we find that because of the ultimate cost of doing this and the getting people in and the sound effects and all those things, they had to wind up doing a deal with the BBC to get this thing fully funded. Again, it's fascinating to me that here's a guy who is pushing the limits of the known cinema business with creating new technology and special effects and all these things. And he's such a forward thinker, but he's still grounding his brand in this sort of old time radio theater genre. It's fascinating.
I read that one of the factors in Lucas's support and the token $1 fee was the challenge of taking Star Wars, a visual spectacle, and bringing it to radio. Special effects changed movie making forever. And to take the story, which in Lucas's mind is the most important thing, right? Is the foundation of Star Wars. Yes, you can get caught up in all the visual effects and the ships and the lasers, but it's the story that keeps you coming back. And obviously, there's a level of trust here that it'll be done well and done right. I wasn't able to find in my research any mention of Lucas beyond the sale of the rights for the radio drama. Did you come across anything that indicated he was involved beyond that?
So in some of the biographies and whatnot that I've read of Lucas, it's mentioned as kind of one of these things as an example of the global popularity of Star Wars and the fact that people are wanting to do all these things. It's sort of mentioned generally in the conversation of merchandising, but I haven't seen or read anything that would indicate that he had a hand in any of this in the creation portion. I think that he like a lot of things, he was a little more involved in the selection of the people at the beginning, as opposed to when he sort of just handed off the Christmas special to a network and said, "Yeah, go do your thing. I'm working right now. I'm writing a sequel. I'm really really busy in Hollywood. Go make that. Go do whatever. Just send me the checks." And then he saw what he got. I think he learned a lesson from that, and that's why the core team that was involved in this, a trusted writer who has at that time has written several commercially successful Star Wars novels. The Han Solo it stars in those stories, and ultimately he winds up, I believe, writing the Lando Calrissian Chronicles. The core people involved with the product, people he knew, you're going to be putting something in good hands when it comes to quality and production value and general seriousness of taking the way they take entertainment. But no, I had not heard anything about him. I think part of it was trying to get the original actors to get involved, but I don't think he worked really hard at any editing or day-to-day oversight of the recording or being involved. Because we're talking about right now, 1981, we are in the writing and pre-production for Return of the Jedi. So he's busy at the studio. I think he was probably more cautious up front than he was when he did the holiday special, but I have not seen anything or read anything that would indicate that he had any daily contact or any real hand in the finished product.
Okay. And I also couldn't find any reaction from him, but he goes on to sell the rights for The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. It's fair to say he was pleased with the result. So even though he charges only $1, NPR has gotten a very good deal here, but they're still facing higher production costs than normal. Again, they have this new show called Playhouse, and they're just not used to production on this level. They end up forming a partnership with the BBC. The first broadcast of the first episode in the United States takes place in March. The first broadcast of the first episode for the BBC takes place in July. They're a few months behind. The partnership brings John Madden, who's an experienced director, has experience in radio drama, and he's going to be great for the production. Side note, in terms of production costs, in 1983, Mankiewicz resigns as president of NPR due to $6 million in debt. So ultimately, Star Wars did not save NPR from budget cuts and cancellations, and it did not lead to a long, happy tenure for Mankiewicz. Once the rights are secured, the producers need a script. They hire sci-fi novelist Brian Daley. You already mentioned he wrote the Han Solo trilogy, which had come out and been a bestseller before the radio drama and prior to The Empire Strikes Back. He has a relationship with George Lucas, so Lucas grants him access to early drafts of A New Hope, including the deleted scenes, and Daley adds some original backstories. So the second episode of the radio drama, called Points of Origin, involving the rebels' procurement of the Death Star plans, is original. Daley writes the trilogy's radio scripts. He writes all three, plus a short story preceding The Empire Strikes Back, when Han and Leia are in Echo Base and they're arguing in the hallway early in the film, mention of a bounty hunter on Ord Mantell. If you want that story, listen to Rebel Mission to Ord Mantell, and that's from Brian Daley. He contributed a lot to Star Wars. He gave us swoop bikes and vibro blades and the Z95 Headhunter and the Tyon Hegemony and the planet Eti 4. All these things have since become part of the official Star Wars canon. The skull from the cover of his Han Solo and the Lost Legacy novel, which is the final book in his Han Solo trilogy, actually appears as an Easter egg in Solo, a Star Wars story. Dryden Voss has it on display in his office on his yacht. It's a pretty cool tie-in. Stepping back, how did Daly do? How do we assess his work here, this script that he put together?
The quote unquote original stuff, the things that were outside of what we received in the movie. I think he did a good job. I mean, he did with Lucas's core notes. I think he did a good job of expanding on the story. Some of the stuff, and again, we'll get into it much deeper, but the setup, right, where we meet Luke, and then the setup where we understand where the plans come from for the Death Star, where then we ultimately join the story in progress, so to speak, where the radio drama after an hour finally catches up to the opening scenes of Star Wars. I think it's good. It establishes some of the stakes. It helps us get a more complete and perhaps even more nuanced view of some of the main characters involved. It introduces us to some characters that are only mentioned peripherally in the films, or characters that we don't see officially in canon until the prequels. Bail Organa, for example. It's this long, epic, week-to-week radio drama. The format, it's hard to do a one-to-one comparison of the formats because, we're used to motion pictures around 2 hours and fairly quick, and we only get as much as we need to move the story along and to give us what we need to understand what we're being shown visually. This thing had to have room to breathe a little bit because, like you said earlier, it's about exposition. It's about explaining to the listeners what they need to have in their mind's eye. If my experience with visual Star Wars is impacting my ability to appreciate audio Star Wars, but I thought he did a good job. I mean, the characters were true. So the extra portions that he wrote, say for Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker, etc., Han Solo, they felt true to the characters for the most part. The performances surrounding those characters we could talk about later, but I felt like the dialogue really represented them and felt consistent with what we got in the films. I did enjoy the little extra bits here and there. The fact that Princess Leia and Darth Vader had met previously to their meeting in the film version. So in general, I would say it was great. It definitely changes the format and the pace, though, of the story compared to what we got on film.
Have you ever read the Han Solo trilogy?
A long time ago. It's been, it's probably been 10, 12 years since I've read it. And it was one of those things. I finally picked up a set to have in my collection, and I kind of breezed through it. I don't know if I gave it the due attention that it deserved. And I still haven't read the Lando Calrissian ones.
This project, listening to the radio dramatization, doing the research, learning about Brian Daly's involvement, I need to reread. I need to go back. It could be our next project. We could tackle the Han Solo trilogy.
I do have a lot more interest in it because here's the thing. I got burned early on Splinter of the Mind's Eye, right? Alan Dean Foster's novel that's supposed to be a sequel to Star Wars. It was authorized by Lucas to be written immediately because he wanted to capitalize on the popularity. He wasn't sure if he was going to make another movie. And you read that, it's so incredibly strange, awkward, and weird, and a little bit cringy based on what we got moving forward with the films. So I kind of just shied away from any of the novelization stuff that was being made in that era. And I didn't really start reading Star Wars books until Timothy Zahn put out the Thrawn trilogy in the early 90s, because at that point I knew this was all new stuff we were getting. And so it was supposed to work within the canon of the films that we got. So I didn't, like I said, I perused through them. I moved through them pretty quick, but I think I like yourself, I need to go back and do a nice, slow, close reading of the text and kind of see, because I mean, again, I've enjoyed the I have enjoyed the radio broadcast, and that's all his script. And I'm actually kind of looking forward to listening to the other two films as well, just to kind of see where this goes.
I recall getting the trilogy as a present, winter holidays, I think, but a set of the 3 paperbacks in a box with some cool artwork. So, all right, let's move on. Talk about the cast a little bit. Only 2 members of the movie cast participated in the radio dramatization: Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker and Anthony Daniels as C-3PO. Filming for Raiders of the Lost Ark ruled out Harrison Ford, and I don't know whether or not the producers invited Carrie Fisher and James Earl Jones, but I couldn't find any explanations for their absences. They just weren't a part of it. Perry King plays Han Solo, Anne Sachs plays Leia Organa, Bernard Behrens plays Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Brock Peters plays Darth Vader, and that is true for all 3 of the Star Wars radio dramas. Perry King auditioned for Han Solo with George Lucas during the casting of A New Hope. Obviously, he did not get the part over Harrison Ford. On YouTube, that audition, check it out. You can see Perry King trying to earn the part. He has a long career in film and television. He played recurring characters on Melrose Place, Spin City, and Big Love. Anne Sachs focuses her efforts on live theater, including Broadway. She has many leading stage roles, but to this day, Princess Leia, her most prominent part in terms of the popularity, the exposure. Bernard Behrens, another long career in television and theater, but like Sachs, the radio drama Obi-Wan Kenobi is his best known character. By professional standards, Brock Peters is the most successful. Prior to Star Wars, he played Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird. After Star Wars, he'll play Admiral Cartwright in Star Trek The Voyage Home and The Undiscovered Country. Plays Joseph Sisko in Deep Space Nine, and he has many voice acting parts like Darth Vader. So he's one of the few who has starred in both Star Wars and Star Trek. He received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Screen Actors Guild. He delivered Gregory Peck's eulogy, and he sang background vocals on Harry Belafonte's The Banana Boat song. Quite a career in show business for Brock Peters. Keen Curtis, who plays Tarkin, is the voice of Balthazar on The Smurfs, and he appears in 15 episodes of Cheers. He was a stage manager until Orson Welles facilitated his acting career, and he received a Tony Award for Best Supporting Actor in a Musical in 1971. He became a star on Broadway. Adam Arkin, the voice of Fixer, is Alan Arkin's son. He played recurring characters in Sons of Anarchy and Chicago Hope, and he's directed numerous episodes of Justified and Sons of Anarchy. And apart from their theater work, most cast members were character actors in cinema and television before and after Star Wars. Recognizable faces, hundreds of credits, many played roles in soap operas and animated series. A remarkably high number go on to found theaters and theater companies across the country, which I guess makes sense. People from that era grew up with live entertainment. Entertainers learned how to perform on stage before they learned how to act for microphones and cameras. The group's early work bridged the 1930s through the 1960s. And this is the preeminent time for, well, arguably local theater, but certainly radio. Fun fact, Joel Brooks, who plays Heater, won big as a contestant on Dick Clark's $10,000 Pyramid. His celebrity partner was Lucy Arnaz. They became friends. Later, they appeared together as the game show's celebrity guests. The supporting cast included comedian David Alan Grier from In Living Color, who was a student of the director John Madden. He is Stormtrooper number 3.
A lot of people involved in this, like you were talking about, a very prolific, in the Hollywood / stage, Broadway / radio, the whole thing. Like, there's a ton of people, tons of credits. Like you talked about Brock Peters, he's been in hundreds of movies and television shows and radio dramas and live performances. I mean, he's probably the guy. Mark Hamill might be more famous by name recognition, but not by cinema credits. There's some really interesting people who had very well-respected careers going into this and maintained and had long and well-respected careers after this. Obviously, doing the radio drama of Star Wars didn't propel people into the national spotlight like being in the actual Star Wars film would, but it's impressive when you go and you look at the backgrounds of all the people in the cast. These are not. This is not, the USC radio department going over to the USC drama department and going, I need 30 people, and I need 5 ladies and 25 dudes, and I need one guy who's got a deep voice, and I need and just give me whatever students you have. We're doing a thing. I mean, they actually went, and this is probably why NPR died in debt and all that kind of stuff, is because we went and found real people and probably paid them a little bit of money to do this. We talk about how weird it is, and it kind of is, but at the same time, you can tell from the performances of the voice actors that these are people who are taking this seriously, and they are trying to convey Star Wars, like you say, through an audio format. And we talked about the challenge of bringing a visual story to an audio format. And I think these people worked very hard at trying to achieve that through emotion and inflection and all these things. And then, of course, the script is written in such a way to use exposition that they did well with. For me, I mean, there's a few things that, and again, I say this, it's loving criticism in a way, because I'm used to Harrison Ford as Han Solo, okay, and so Perry King, who I don't want to be like, and then this is why we know he didn't get the role, but his portrayal of the character of Han Solo comes across differently than the Harrison Ford portrayal of Han Solo. And it's not bad, it's just different. And I think that the different is uncomfortable for me, because I am so used to Han Solo and being Harrison Ford, and that's it. The way he delivers some of those lines that we hear Harrison Ford delivering in our head, when somebody else says them, we're like, yeah, that's you talking Han Solo to me. It's not really, you're not Han Solo. And I think that's probably my biggest hurdle to get over in this whole thing, is knowing that it's not these individuals' fault per se that they're not Carrie Fisher or Harrison Ford or James Earl Jones, or you name it, right? Any of the actors that we ultimately get in Star Wars. So I have to get over that myself. But the performances are strong. You can tell that these are all industry professionals. My biggest thing is Brock Peters as Darth Vader.
You must. It's your duty.
Duty? No.
Yes. Your duty to our rebel alliance. Your obligation to Alderaan and to your father. Your father commands you to tell us. Yes. Don't you wish to please your father? Then tell me what you did with those plans. Say the words.
But
your father orders you to tell us.
Father would...
You try my patience. Tell me what was done with those plans.
No.
Listen to my voice.
Now, the minute he started talking, I heard Admiral Cartwright. I love Star Trek as well, as we've mentioned before on these shows. And I'm a huge fan of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. And his character, Admiral Cartwright, in that movie plays a pivotal role. He's part of the, spoiler alert, this movie came out 30 years ago. You can deal with this. A pivotal part of the conspiracy to undermine the peace talks between the Klingon Empire and the Federation. And his delivery, he has a very, very unique voice, right? And I'm used to him as Admiral Cartwright and the lines that he says in that film and his interactions with Kirk and whatnot. And so as soon as I heard the Vader voice, I just felt like it was Admiral Cartwright talking through a megaphone. And so it was a little disconcerting for me. I think over some time and listening to this, I got used to it, but I still couldn't quite. He's not my Vader, kind of a thing. But again, it's not the fault of any of these people. I mean, you're cast to play a role and you do your best. And like I said, they all did a great job. But I think for a lot of listeners, I could see someone who is a big fan of Star Wars in that moment, in that time, maybe seen these movies numerous times, going and sitting down by the radio to listen to these things and just being like, wait, what is that? Some of the other actors playing various roles of Imperial officers and other rebellion types had very similar voices. So there were some moments where I got tripped up a little bit, like who's talking. There wasn't enough distinction between some of the character voices that you were automatically cued that this is a different character talking. Some of the audio techniques that were used, like for example, when the stormtroopers are talking, we get the move along guy, and we kind of know the sort of interference or the crackling sound that the microphone with the stormtroopers talking gives us. The stormtroopers talking, the audio effect that they used on the voices of the actors who were talking as stormtroopers was also a little weird and kind of overshadowed their dialogue a little bit for me. But again, this is me, super Star Wars nerd, nitpicking other super Star Wars nerds making Star Wars stuff. So it's like, I mean, take it for what it is. But there was just some things that I had to really kind of work around in my head when I was listening to this drama. But I can't put it at the feet of the actors. I think I have to associate it with the medium and what they were trying to do with it.
You said for Perry King, it felt like Perry King was reading Han Solo's part to you. What stood out about his portrayal of the character?
Well, I would say that, and I don't know if this is because of the dialogue and the extra writing that was done, but my interpretation or my emotional reaction to the performance by Perry King as Han Solo, I didn't like his Han.
Hello, gents. Han Solo, captain of the Millennium Falcon.
I'm pleased to meet you, Captain Solo.
My first mate, Chewbacca, here tells me you're looking for passage to the Alderaan system. Is that right?
That is a fact, we are. If yours is a fast ship.
Fast ship? You mean to tell me you've never heard of the Millennium Falcon?
Should I have?
Where you been? The Falcon's the ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs.
Which would make you a spice smuggler, is that correct?
Well, why don't we just say that I'm an independent businessman?
His Han Solo was a jerk. And I think as part of it is because of the extra dialogue that we got. His delivery of some of the lines that we knew from Harrison Ford. Like Harrison Ford was a stone cold killer, and he was, a mercenary, and he was all out for himself, but he was still kind of cool, right? Like he had the edge about him, but it was kind of the edge. You're like, I kind of want to hang out with this guy. You ultimately kind of knew that. You kind of felt like it was a facade. It was something that he put up in order to protect himself from other people and to give off that cool detached vibe. After he kills Greedo and he flips the coin, he's like, "Hey, sorry about the mess." Who does that, right? But again, it's showing off for the audience, right? Like we know that why would he come along on this adventure? I mean, yes, he was promised riches and whatever, but he starts to do things in his actions are speaking more than his sarcasm, kind of a thing. But the portrayal of Han Solo in the radio drama, we get some expository language where you're kind of like, this guy is really just about himself and doesn't care about anything. Because, like, for example, when they're on the Death Star and they get out of the compactor and they're running around, they're trying to get back to the ship, he's telling Chewbacca, like, we're gone, dude. We're gone. We're back at the ship. Nobody's here. Forget it. We're getting on this thing. We're getting out of here. It's way more than I bargained for. These people are garbage. I'm out. And I'm like, Han Solo would never do that. Like I'm thinking that as he's saying these things. I'm like, that's not Han, right? That's not what I know. I mean, yeah, he's hard and that was too cruel, I guess, it just wasn't true to me, to the character. So that again, and I can't say that's Perry King's problem. It's the dialogue that he was given to read. I felt like some of the lines that he delivered weren't as serious. So like Han Solo says things, a certain way, they feel more serious. He was kind of delivering them with a little more glib kind of delivery. He felt more sarcastic to me, or more devil may care, in his attitude about things. And but other than that, I mean, he's Han Solo, right? He portrays what were the core. I guess he's like 80% Han. Like, I guess that's the best way I could say it. Like, I felt like, okay, yes, it's Han Solo, it's Han Solo. But there was moments when, especially when he was delivering lines that we know from A New Hope, where I was kind of like, well, that's an interesting choice of tone or inflection, or the way that you said it, or the pacing of the way that you said it. It felt not quite right.
80% Han. I love it. It's great. I'm still struggling to describe a lot of the things that I heard in the radio drama, including Perry King's portrayal of Han. Just to add one thing to all that you said, there's an inadequacy here. King's Han Solo, more than Harrison Ford's Han Solo, is out to prove himself to everyone. He has a bit of an inferiority complex. He has the same self-assured facade, but with King's performance, you get the sense that he really needs validation from everyone around him. And then there is that mercenary component, which you mentioned. That's my observations to you.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think it comes from the tone of voice and the way that the pacing and the way the lines are read. I mean, so this is what I got from Perry King. His delivery of the lines, like you say, it changes the sort of the core of Han, right? So he feels more, like you say, more like the needy teenager, I guess, or trying, like you say, trying to prove himself, or always trying to interject himself into the conversation. When in the film, everybody kind of turns to Han and kind of is like, well, what are you going to say next? Because this is going to be interesting, kind of a deal. And while he is putting up a facade, and both of the actors are portraying the character with a facade. You're right. Each of the actors, through the delivery of the lines and the way they play the role, show you something different that is behind the facade. And I think Han Solo in the films is the guy who works very hard at establishing a reputation of being a villain, or not a villain, I shouldn't say villain, but being a person who is dangerous. And the radio drama version of Han Solo is, I'm going to portray this facade of being, I don't know, competent, in control, whatever. But then really what we're seeing is it's like the kid who just got promoted to be night manager at McDonald's coming across his first really angry customer in the drive-thru. I've got the shirt that says I'm a manager, right? And I've got the power to do manager things, but I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm just going to quote the manual. There's some of that going on, I think, with that version of Han Solo that we're getting in the radio drama, where it's different than what Harrison Ford gave us.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Anne Sachs as Leia, I thought she was excellent. In doing the research, some people were saying, well, Anne Sachs is my Princess Leia. Take Carrie Fisher, move her to the number 2 spot. And I did not find myself missing Carrie Fisher or wishing that Carrie Fisher was a part of it. Anne Sachs brought a depth and a range of emotion, and we won't get into this yet, but she was asked to do, in many ways, a lot more than Carrie Fisher in A New Hope. But your thoughts on Anne Sachs?
I thought Anne Sachs was fantastic. I have nothing bad to say about her performance. Like you say, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as use the word blaspheme, but I could see why people feel the way that they do about this. Yeah, she was asked to do a lot more. I mean, first of all, she has a lot more dialogue in this version of Star Wars than Carrie Fisher had in Episode 4. She has to do a lot more acting, I guess, for lack of a better word, because of the format of radio. We can talk later about the interrogation scene and things like that, but she's really having to give you a lot more about what she's experiencing and what she's doing. And, like the Tyon incident, great work. When she needs to be calm and paced, she's calm and paced. When she needs to be frenetic and emotional, she's frenetic and emotional. when she's going through the interrogation, you rather uncomfortably can feel her pain. She's an amazingly talented performer, and like you say, I wanted for nothing in the Princess Leia department in the radio drama.
You talked about Brock Peters, and like you, the biggest adjustment for me in the radio drama was Brock Peters and not James Earl Jones. Like Perry King playing Han Solo, it's a different take on Darth Vader. There's more for Vader to say and do. It's not, I tried not to approach it from the better or worse standpoint. It's different. This Darth Vader he's more procedural. He commits more villainy, I guess. I don't know. I'm struggling for my words here. There is a more human quality to Brock Peters' portrayal. I'm not sure that's a good thing. At some point, did you make peace with it? Did you settle in?
I don't know if I did or not, honestly. I first of all, I'm retraining myself on Star Wars in this 5-hour experience, right? I will say this, that if you had anybody else playing C-3PO, this thing would have been abject trash, because you cannot fake Anthony Daniels, right? You just can't. So between that and Mark Hamill being Luke Skywalker, and of course the great performance of Anne Sachs, I think a lot of that, I just settled right into all that, and just that was fine. And then all these other characters, we didn't really get a lot of dialogue from them except for Tarkin in the movie. So these other characters, giving voices to them, that was easy. I settled in. Okay, that's so and so, that's so and so. And like I said, there was a few people who were tonally very close. So when you got into some of these group conversations, I got a little lost. But Solo was different to me. I got used to his voice, but the character felt awkward to me. Vader, Brock Peters delivering the line, "Yeah, they'll be the alien trash of the galaxy, and we need to destroy them and get them to their knees, and we can dictate terms." And it's like, and I keep thinking I'm sitting there at Starfleet around the table talking to Kirk about Klingons. So I don't know if I ever really got used to him. I think that his delivery of Vader's lines, like you say, it was very strange. On one hand, James Earl Jones's Darth Vader has more emotion, but he has less humanity. Brock Peters has more humanity but less emotion. And like you say, that's problematic for this character who is supposed to be this visage of evil, this dark force that just wanders around and crushes people's throats. And yes, you're right. He does engage in more villainous activity. I mean, he goes and subjugates a planet at the beginning where he first meets Princess Leia, choking people out. He's like, "Oh, do you feel that? Do you feel the force crushing your throat?" Yeah. Dang. Do I need a play-by-play while you're killing me? I mean, I understand that's the format of radio. I get that. But at the same time, that extra exposition creates almost a sadistic quality for Vader that was not necessarily there in the films. Plus, again, the torture scene, which if you want to talk about in detail, we can. But obviously, the torture scene in the radio drama, something that occurs off screen in A New Hope, and for good reason, because if it occurred like this, it's incredibly creepy and intimate and bad. So, but like you say, Brock Peters doing that in a procedural way feels very wrong. So I don't know. It's like I'm uncomfortable with his Vader, and I don't know, again, if it's his voice or if it's the things that we had him do in the radio drama as in conjunction with his activities that we've already been exposed to in the film that made me feel uncomfortable about it. But I think it's maybe a multifaceted thing for me. I don't know if I was fully able to separate his voice from my previous experience with his acting. And then the extra stuff that we got in the radio drama that he did. And then, like I said, the original, the way that he's more human, less emotional, and then James Earl Jones being more emotional, less human. And that creates a very strange experience when you're talking about Vader.
Yeah. And we'll get into the plot, but the torture scene, far more brutal than anything that we saw from Vader on screen. So these weird contradictions. I respect the performance, but Brock Peters unfortunately happened to be up against the most iconic villain in cinema. And this is a tall order. This is a big ask. And we often talk about with Vader, less is more. And maybe, I mean, last point here, last question. Was there too much Vader? Was that part of it? Was there just too much?
You might have too much Brock Peters, but I don't know if you have too much Vader. I mean, this is all from this era where we didn't have a lot of Star Wars. And so determining Vader's role in the Star Wars universe is something that evolved over the course of the 3 films. When you actually analyze his role in episode 4, he is clearly a warrior, an enforcer, a loyal henchman, but he works for a guy who's a bureaucrat, right? He works for this governor / Grand Moff who is in charge of the Death Star project, at least as far as we know it at the time in 1977. It's before Krennic, pre-Krennic. Vader is his henchman. He is Tarkin's henchman. He is Tarkin's enforcer. Tarkin works for the Emperor, and he keeps talking about the Emperor this and the Emperor that, and then Tarkin commands Vader to not choke out one of his officers, and he's like, "As you wish." Right? So it isn't until Empire Strikes Back where he has a superstar destroyer and he's directly communicating with the Emperor, and we've changed his role now in the universe. So the portrayal of Vader in the radio drama, to me, is consistent with what we saw in episode 4. He's working within the law of the Empire. He's working for various Moffs and governors and admirals and doing his own thing. He's down on the ground cleaning up this, I don't know, he's suppressing some planet or whatever. I mean, but he's on the ground getting involved in the bloody, gross day-to-day work of being a fascist. And it isn't until later in the trilogy that he becomes elevated to this regal co-ruler of the Empire with the Emperor. So him doing Vader or doing day-to-day work as Vader in the radio drama didn't really strike me as being weird. As for too much, I don't know. Again, a lot of the stuff that I would normally say is too much, I feel like I have to, rein it in a little bit and say, no, this is because of the genre that we're experiencing Star Wars in. Vader has to talk a lot about a lot of stuff because you're at home in your living room listening to him on the radio. You can't see what he's doing. And so that does take away from sort of that silent, menacing character that just stands there and breathes at you and you're trying to figure out, is he going to kill me? So some of it is extra dialogue, obviously, that has to be written for this longer format. Some of it has to do with the exposition conversation that has to describe actions that are being taken. And then I think some of it is Brock Peters having to try and follow the legend that is James Earl Jones.
I ask because I'm still not settled on it myself. So let's move on, talk a little bit about the recording. Westlake Recording Studios in Hollywood hosted the actors. Some articles I've read say that the recordings took place the previous summer. Most of my sources say early in 1981, in the first quarter of the year. 1 year later, Michael Jackson recorded Thriller, the greatest selling album of all time, at Westlake. Thanks to George Lucas's charitable licensing deal, John Williams' score and Ben Burtt's sound effects enhanced the dialogue. Tom Vagley, a well-known producer on Broadway and NPR and a friend of the director John Madden, created the finished episodes in a studio in Minneapolis after the principal recording lasted about 2 weeks and covered roughly one installment per day. The magnetic tapes of the music and the effects. To guarantee its safety, he bought an adjoining seat for a suitcase full of tapes, which I thought was humorous. 2 plane tickets, 1 person. The following year, Vagley's Raiders of the Lost Ark adaptation won the Grammy for Best Spoken Word, Documentary, or Drama Recording.
It's interesting. It's an interesting decision to do that, to take those tapes across country. So going back to my youth, we had the soundtrack for Star Wars, the multi-album set, and I used to listen to it all the time. And the score for the film coincides second by second to what you've seen on screen. And so you associate certain themes and certain musical pieces in the soundtrack with certain things that are happening on screen. They took John Williams' score and they sprinkled it throughout this whole thing, and I think some of it was recorded by the production team because they needed certain lengths to coincide with some of the episodes. So I felt like listening to that music, first of all, there was things in there that I hadn't heard before that were riffs on John Williams' original score. But then I also felt like there was some out of place stuff where one action is being introduced in the radio drama by, say, the music that we were using in that film to cue the Imperials coming onto screen, and yet it's like we're talking about Alderaan, or we're getting the Lars Homestead tunage, but we're on Yavin. It just felt, again, only because I spent so much time with the soundtrack, talked about again on other recordings. Back in my day, but when we were kids and watching Star Wars, there wasn't the internet, and there wasn't even at that point, we didn't really have a lot of access to VHS tapes or beta tapes or whatever it might be. So the only real repetitive exposure we had to Star Wars was with our action figures, where we created headcanon, and then the soundtrack. And so you became really familiar. You knew, it's like any song. I mean, forget the fact that it's a Star Wars soundtrack. If you're a Britney Spears fan or whatever, your favorite song, whatever it might be, the next note. You always know the next note because you've listened to that song 1,000 times, right? And so when you're listening to the score in this radio broadcast and they change it or they add to it or they rearrange the order that it appears in, I noticed that. And I'm not saying everybody would, or that maybe I'm just a super nerd, but again, this was another little thing that sometimes would take me out of the radio drama. The other thing is they did a great job of using sound effects, the blaster sounds, the spaceships, the things like that. The droid sounds, of course, some of the computer console interactions, the doors opening and closing. A lot of that was straight out of Lucasfilm sound archives, and it worked really well. But there was a couple, 3 things in there that again, kind of takes you out. The biggest one for me was at the very end when we're having the briefing, the Rebel pilot briefing before the assault on the Death Star, and they're talking about the plans, and you hear the sound of the slide projector in the background. So like every time he talks about, and this is the exhaust port right before the main port, and he goes click, click, chunk, chunk, right? The things, and he's like, okay, and then here's the trench run, and the clink, clink, chunk, chunk. And again, I had flashbacks when I was a kid, and my parents used to show people vacation photos on slides, and I know that sound, and it's not a happy sound. Kind of this weird 70s, 80s real-time sound effect reference in my Star Wars that just kind of, again, threw me off in the moment. And I guess that's kind of the theme, right, that I'm having with my experience of this radio drama. It's like I'm into it, but then there's these little things that pull me out, and I have to kind of think about it, and I have to digest it. And it's like, oh, this is either something I've experienced in another format, or my previous Star Wars experience is impeding my ability to experience this Star Wars the way it should be.
The music and the sound effects definitely enhance the drama. I really can't imagine this production without the music and the sound effects, and how empty that would feel. And so I'm glad Lucas included it with the rights. So, promotion. The principal recording done with Vaguely's finished episodes now. It's time to promote the radio drama. We have a lot of radio spots on NPR. We have some magazine and newspaper print ads featuring C-3PO with headphones and a microphone advertising the radio drama. Mark Hamill's quoted as saying, one reason I like doing the radio version is that it was a serial. That was the way George originally thought of Star Wars, like one of those old-fashioned cliffhangers. And so beginning in early March 1981, the cliffhangers begin. And every episode ends with a cliffhanger until you finish the radio drama with episode 13. It premieres at Griffith Observatory in LA, beautiful observatory overlooking the city. One episode of the show is played under the stars. I couldn't through my research, figure out which one was actually played. I mean, did they start with 3 because 3 is the beginning of the film and it would be more familiar to people? I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. I also couldn't find who actually attended the event. I was wondering if George Lucas was there. I assume Mark Hamill was there, but again, I was trying to find a guest list and or some photos, and I couldn't find anything.
It's interesting to me because we were kids and we were very much in tune with Star Wars in this time, right off the high of Empire Strikes Back and wild anticipation of Return of the Jedi. You know, we knew another movie was coming. We just didn't know what it was going to be, what it was going to be about. But like we had our toys and we had our comics and this desire and this hunger for anything Star Wars. And I will say I had no idea that this was even going on. Now, in my household, my mom is a huge fan of public broadcasting television as well as public broadcasting radio. Maybe she didn't want me to have more Star Wars. I don't know, but like there was never a peep of this thing. Like I had no idea it was happening as a kid. I don't know if my parents knew about it and just decided that I was spending way too much time with Star Wars to begin with and just not to tell me about it. But I didn't know about this thing until many, many, many years later. And it was probably, I want to say the late 90s or the early 2000s when I came across at a used bookstore a set of CDs with this recording on it. And I was like, well, they did a radio drama? Like, what? And so, I didn't have a personal subscription to a newspaper to see any ads in a paper. I don't know where they would have put the poster in my town. We didn't have a radio theater place you went to. I mean, again, it's a weird time, right? We're in the early 80s. So radio dramas, again, for kids, probably not even a big thing. But I don't ever recall having seen any advertisement for this as a child when it was actually released. It's also, to me, it's very interesting because we go back and we're trying to do research on this for these recordings, and we're looking things up and we're finding interviews with people, and we're stitching together little bits. You read an interview with the writer, and he talks about his whole career, and then he'll mention in a passing, oh yeah, and I wrote that radio thing, or the producer, oh I did this, oh yeah, and I took the tapes in the plane, but it doesn't tell you anything else. We know that the premiere, the conservatory, but like you said, who was there? For some reason, there's sort of a black hole in the collective knowledge or the history of Star Wars surrounding this thing. That's, I don't. I mean, it's not strange or weird or somehow, but it's kind of sad to me because it took us a long time to get back to this or to find it or to really delve into it. But the fact that now in the conversation regarding Star Wars, we look back on this and people are more interested about how many Coca-Colas and Snickers bars George Lucas was eating a day when he was editing Star Wars when he found out he was diabetic. But we don't really care about the whole process behind creating this radio drama, which, when you think about it, is a significant thing. And it was a serious undertaking, and it was a huge project, and a lot of people worked on this and spent a lot of time doing it. And we don't really see a lot of conversation in the looking back on the history of Star Wars regarding these particular entries. And I understand, like Lucas hates the holiday special and he doesn't want to ever talk about it, and that's fine. But there is a void in knowledge regarding, what it actually took. I mean, we have the product in hand, and we know, we can listen to that, but the actual behind the scenes stuff, like we were talking about, it was very outside of buying a set of these. We don't know where we can even find the making of behind the scenes kind of stuff that was released with this. Like it's not out there in the public domain. So anyway, it was just interesting that like I don't ever recall this thing until I accidentally stumbled across it in a used bookstore, and I'm sure my experience is not unique, but it's also not ubiquitous. But anyway, it's fascinating. The lost Star Wars.
In putting this show together, there were several times where I find myself frustrated. I definitely want to learn more. So viewers of this video, if you know where to find sources, more information about this, definitely let us know. Obviously, we've done our absolute best to track down the information, but we don't have microfilm and microfiche of the LA Times from the early 1980s. So if it's out there and you know about it, lend a hand, leave a comment. We'd love to learn more. This is a learning experience, really. In the teaser that we did for this series of shows, we talked about completely changing your understanding of Star Wars, and I feel that the radio drama did that. It completely reframed everything for me, and it's a learning experience. And you said in our private discussions, it left me with more questions than answers, and I couldn't agree more. And I want these questions answered, but it's often difficult to get the information. So, question for you: did you buy that set? Do you own this radio drama on disc?
I did not, and I do not. Not yet. At the time, it was a fairly expensive proposition, and so I was like, well, I'll get this one day, and then probably forgot about it. And then, now we're talking about it, and we're doing this research. Now I'm trying to track down a set at a reasonable price, because that too has become a collectible. And as we know with Star Wars, generally, if it's Star Wars and it's old and it's unique or in limited production, it's going to cost you money. So in hindsight, like all things Star Wars, I probably should have bought it then. But no, I will get a copy eventually. But I don't have it.
I have a wish list, and this moved onto the wish list and straight up. So it's up near the top right now because it's just so weird and interesting and compelling. I need a copy of it, so I'm seeking a copy on disc, and there are different versions, and I should point that out. We can talk a little bit about the original release, and then what's come since in terms of sales and the marketing, the packaging. The radio drama premieres and airs in 1981. The first recording isn't available for sale for many, many, many years. And then there's a re-release in the 20-teens, and that re-release includes a 14th episode, which is a behind-the-scenes making of documentary. I couldn't find that anywhere. I couldn't find it on YouTube or other sources for podcasts and news and information. So I'm still seeking that. Definitely want to get my hands on that 14th behind the scenes episode. And there are trading cards. Topps released collector's trading cards with the 20-teens release of the radio drama. And they came, the radio drama came in two different packages. It came in a Rebel Alliance package, and it came in an Imperial package. The trading cards were the same in the sense that you're collecting one series, but they had all kinds of cool extras like signature cards and puzzle cards. Very, very cool set. Oh, well, and I should point out also, because it's a radio drama, that the cards don't feature photographs or film cells. They're illustrations. The set is completely illustrated, and that was that was actually what the sets were called. They were called Star Wars Illustrated. The artwork is great. The color's great. Definitely on the wish list. And then trying to find that 14th episode.
It's kind of like one of those, like everything got the special edition re-release in a way. The enhanced set with the extra behind the scenes stuff, and then of course the trading cards, etc. That one, like you say, is probably more the grail piece than the first release. But as someone who has Star Wars on Laserdisc, video disc, VHS, 5-ways, DVD, and Blu-ray, I'll probably wind up getting both of them. So, but yeah, the thing about being on finding this on the internet and talking about different versions, there's a bunch of different ways you can experience this through YouTube and other channels. The true episodic release format, get them as they aired. And then some of the other versions, which I know is one of the ones that I listen to, where people have sort of edited out some of that transitional episode or episodic endings. And so it flows as more one coherent, long format piece. There is a hardcore fan base to this thing. I mean, it might not be as big or as vocal as some of the other groups within Star Wars that have latched onto things, as their focus of collecting or of experiencing Star Wars or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, there's people who are like very, very serious about what version of this they want to listen to and which one they think is the best. And again, it's a fun part for me of being part of the Star Wars fan community, is finding these niche groups and experiencing their obsession. It's fun. So Yeah, again, I would love to have the set with the extra stuff. If I come across some cards, I will give them to you, Jeff. I know you're a big fan of those. But yeah, I would love to hear that last disc or that last episode and just find out, is it bloopers? Is it interviews? And how do we get our hands on an audio file of that outside of buying the whole set? Because it would be fascinating to hear it.
I feel a bit like Anakin and Obi-Wan trapped in a ray shield on Grievous's flagship in episode 3. Like, we're smarter than this. How did we miss this? And that's the thing. How did we miss this? How did I not know about this? Why didn't anyone tell me? Two of the biggest Star Wars fans out there. But that's why we're doing the show. That's one of the reasons. I want to share this thing. I want to bring it to more people's attention and give it more notoriety and maybe give it a boost in popularity. And I'm not suggesting it's better than the film, certainly not. It's just different. And if you love Star Wars, if you appreciate Star Wars, you owe it to yourself, honestly, to check this thing out. And so looking at the time, we're probably going to have to wrap this here. If we get into the plot and start actually going through the story, I don't want to abbreviate this. I think it might be better in parts. If we're going over an hour, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. Could probably cover another couple hours worth of talking.
I guess I need to close this.
Will our hosts actually get to the plot of the radio drama? Tune in next week.
Thus concludes part 1. Part 2 coming soon.
Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, all rights reserved. Galactic Initiative is a registered trademark, and other product and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Use does not imply affiliation or endorsement.